Then we, on behalf of the residents who wish to speak, and I take it as Mrs. Caroline Thomas, Mr. Owen Evans, Mr. Alan Thomas, yes, and Mr. Martin Kunz, Kunz, K-U-N-Z.
He's decided he doesn't want to speak now.
But he doesn't want to speak, fine, yeah. So the process is this, that the licensing officer will present the statement of facts, summarising the facts of the application, any objections, representations, any representations by other persons, sections of government guidance and licensing policy. And the applicant is here anyway, so that it will not apply to the and how that will proceed there. The chair, I will invite representatives of responsible authorities who have made objections, or representatives to address the panel. And we got our own environment department here. And then of course we got as I say, the people, if there's anyone else I would like to know, but at this moment in time there's not anyone else who wishes to speak. So if I hand this over to the...
Chair, if I'd like to, before we lead in with the officer presenting the actual report itself, perhaps if we introduce the officers that are here today. The environmental health officers are here today because their report was at a later stage following a noise report, but they'll explain better throughout this hearing to make it clear to all parties present. So if I can introduce, if you put your mic on, introduce yourselves first of all.
So I'm Sean Yem James, I'm a public health officer.
Hugh Owen, Principal Officer, Environmental Health.
Samantha Wynne, Licensing Officer.
And I'm Lynda O'Gorman, the Principal Licensing Officer here today. Before we start, the people that has been mentioned on behalf of all the residents here today, Caroline Thomas, Owen Evans, and Alan Thomas. Alan Thomas, I believe, is a member of the Community Council. He's not made a representation in his own right. He will be representing a number of people here today, but just to make it clear that obviously he can't go over and above what the has actually been submitted prior to this hearing today. You can only represent those that have submitted those objections.
which in effect is not a community council as a body.
Yeah, that's it. And so I'll hand you... Just to give me that key. One other thing, if members do want to speak, if you could just press your mic when you want to speak, and then press it off again then thereafter, because what happens with the live streaming, it focuses on you and it puts the microphone out, and then it ceases there when you actually press the button again. Okay, so I made that clear.
It's the button in the centre, and I just want to say this. If anyone's going to refer to any part of this document here, I'd like to know the page number that you're referring to, please. Thank you. Okay, when you're ready.
Okay, I'll hand over to Samantha Wynne, Licensing Officer.
Good morning. The application before us has been made by Bess Asper of Dyffryn House, Monmouth. The application is for a new premises licence for Woodbank, Llanhennach. The applicant has described the premises as a detached property accessible by a long drive, situated in its own grounds of approximately 20 acres in the village of Llanhennach. A plan of the internal area is attached as Appendix B, along with a satellite view of the area attached as Appendix C. The applicant has applied for alcohol and live recorded music Monday to Sunday, 8 a.m. till 1:30 a.m, indoors and outdoors. Marquee weddings, a total of 15 until 1:30 a.m, and outside on the veranda until 11 p.m. Christmas and New Year's Eve until 2 a.m. Plays Monday to Sunday, 8 a.m. until 12:30 a.m, indoors and outdoors. Late night refreshment, Monday to Sunday, 11 p.m. until 1:30 a.m. And the hours open to the public, Monday to Sunday, 8 a.m. until 2 a.m. And this can all be seen in part 3.1 of the report. The applicant also provided an operating schedule, as can be seen at 3.2 in the report.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm wondering if everyone who can hear would raise their hands if they can hear.
Yeah,
I am in it.
Can everyone hear what's being said? Sorry?
Where's all that? Hello. Shall I get closer?
Let's try that one.
Hang on.
Oh, yeah, you're switched.
Hello? Hello?
Can you
Hello?
hear it now?
No? I got to be closer, have I? Oh, God.
Yeah, you need to speak, you need to be very close to them.
All right, sorry. I won't go through all that about the timings again, but you can be seen in 3.1 of the report, where the applicant has made their first application and with the timings that they requested. The applicant also provided an operating schedule that can be seen in 3.2 of the report. 3.3 of the report outlines the statutory duty the applicant has under the Act regarding consultation and legal notices, and this was carried out by the applicant. As a statutory consultee, planning were consulted, and you can see this at 3.4 of the report. Planning stated, planning have no comment on this as we have not yet received an application for the change of use. We therefore have not been able to assess this use of the site for the new purpose from a planning point of view. Now, Section 9.45 of the revised guidance issued under this Section 182 of the Licensing Act 2003 states, in relation to planning, where businesses have indicated when applying for a licence under the Act that they have also applied for planning permission or intend to do so, licensing committees and officers should consider discussion with their planning counterparts prior to determination with the aim of agreeing mutually acceptable operating hours and scheme designs. The applicant has submitted a pre-application to planning, and licensing will liaise with planning on any outcome of this hearing today. Representations to the applications were received from Gwent Police and Licensing. However, following mediation, the applicant agreed to all the amendments put forward by the Police and Licensing, and their representations were then withdrawn as a result of the agreed changes. 3.5 of this report shows these changes to the licence if it was to be granted. The applicant would also be subject to mandatory conditions which are referred to in Appendix F. Environmental Health also submitted a representation requesting a noise assessment report to be prepared by a person with appropriate acoustic qualifications and should be with full regard to relevant guidance. The applicant arranged for this to be carried out and submitted a noise report to the Environmental Health Officer on the 20th of February. This information was forwarded to members and objectors on the 28th of February. This is part of the additional information provided to you. The representation by Environmental Health was then withdrawn. As such, if granted, not only would the licence be subject to the Police and Licensing Agreement in 3.5, but would also be subject to the proposal put forward by Environmental Health, which the applicant agreed to along with the mandatory conditions. There were also 18 separate objectors to the application, and copies of their representations are attached as Appendix G. The concerns raised within these objections refer to an increase in traffic in the narrow lanes, noise pollution, refuse, rubbish storage and disposal, poor visibility through the lanes, risk of public disorder and antisocial behaviour, safety in narrow lanes compromised, concerns for local children, and also concerns for wildlife and farm animals. There are also 5 representations in support of the licence attached as Appendix H. All objectors have been made aware of the changes to the original application following the agreement by the applicant with the responsible authorities, namely Police, Licensing and Environmental Health, and they still wish to pursue their objection. You will hear from Caroline Thomas, who will represent those objectors later within this hearing. We are reminded that representations must be made under the 4 key licensing objectives, and when considering their decision, namely prevention of crime and disorder, public safety, prevention of public nuisance, and protection of children from harm. All other matters should be disregarded. To assist on the matter of considering these 4 licensing objectives, guidance issued by the Home Office under Section 182 of the Licensing Act is attached to this report as Appendix I. I can confirm all parties here today have had sight of this report, and that is being heard today, and the additional material submitted by Environmental Health following the issue of the report.
Is that completed?
It is, yeah.
Thank you. Following on any potential objections from representations from responsible authorities, we now go to the representations to be made by other persons who are, as I said earlier on, Mrs. Caroline Thomas, Mr. Owen Evans, Mr. Alan Thomas, and Mr. Martin Coombs. And of course, anything has been said is entitled to be challenged by Mr. Martin Jones, the solicitor for the applicant. So the first one I got on my list, Mrs. Caroline Thomas.
Hello.
Thank you.
Good morning. Okay.
Before we go on, I mean, we appreciate that there's been a lot of representations, but they're all of a similar nature, and as a consequence of that, I think we, you know, the number of people speaking has been cut down, which you've agreed to anyway. So when you were ready, Mrs. Thomas, and at the end of it all, you can be questioned by the applicant's solicitor and indeed by ourselves.
Okay, fine.
And any officers in relation to environmental matters and that, all licenses. Right, thank you. Mrs. Thomas.
Thank you. I'm here today to
Could you speak into the mic, please?
I am here today to represent the community of Lanhennock, who continue to oppose plans to turn Woodbank into a wedding and events venue. The reports circulated by Samantha Wynne of Licensing do not address any concerns that have been raised in relation to the representations made. We do not feel that the applicant has taken on board any views of the community, even though almost every single household has objected. It seems the applicant is prepared to, and I quote, listen to and work with all the licensing representative authorities, but not to listen to and work with the community and the people who call it home. Following the revised conditions and supporting documentations that have been submitted in relation to Woodbank, I will summarise the key issues that have not been resolved against all 4 licensing objectives. To prevent crime and disorder. The conditions do not go far enough to protect the area and its inhabitants, due to both the rural location and the lack of police resources in the county, who are already serving a population of 91,000. Woodbank's 24/7 entertainment venue would put further strain on resources if antisocial behaviour or any incidents required a police presence. Public safety. There has been no consideration of the effect of significantly increased traffic along a narrow lane. There are no pavements, there is no lighting. Events catering for hundreds of people, 7 days a week, all using the same narrow lane, is a real public safety issue, which has not been addressed. There are limited places to overtake, with a number of blind spots, which to unfamiliar drivers presents a potentially dangerous situation. It will not only impact drivers, but the regular walkers, runners and cyclists and other visitors to the area. Also, Woodbank is situated right next to a working dairy farm. Cattle are regularly moved from one paddock to another via gates situated just 25 yards from the entrance to Woodbank, posing another safety issue. I'd like to draw your attention to the first photo I provided, showing the gates with the field next door to Woodbank.
Can I just interrupt there? I'm assuming the applicant has had sight of these photographs just for clarity for the committee hearing.
I've been informed they have, yes.
And members as well, have you had sight of these photographs as well, just for clarity? Please?
Thank you. It is peak harvesting season during the summer months, when it is proposed that 10 events will take place between July and August. Numerous tractors and other large agricultural vehicles will be using the lane. This will be the case for the 8 farms located on Glenhurst Road, the majority of which will need to pass the entrance of Woodbank. This poses a greater safety issue, not only because of the increase in traffic, but an increase in substantially sized vehicles that can be difficult to pass on what is largely a single track lane. Furthermore, as pointed out in a number of representations, the bridge outside Woodbank is showing large cracks in many places, as you can see in the photo provided. I'll hold it up just for reference, but it's the second photo that was provided. I think it is fair to say that the bridge will not take this huge increase in event traffic and will more than likely mean that it will be closed for a period of time for repairs, resulting in traffic being diverted through the other lane on Usk Road, impacting many more people. To prevent public nuisance. The reduction in hours will still result in substantial activity into the early hours of the morning, which is totally unreasonable, including music until 1 a.m, serving alcohol until 1 a.m, 7 days a week. The limit to 15 external events per year, 10 during July and August, will mean hundreds of guests attending events every single weekend during the summer season, making it impossible to open windows and doors without being subjected to party noise. It would make sitting in your own garden, for those in close proximity, totally unbearable. I would ask why the noise consultants in acoustic who completed the noise report did not arrange a site visit to neighbouring properties to properly assess any impact. To protect children from harm. External events taking place at least every weekend throughout the school summer holidays will mean that both my children and that of other children in the area will be massively affected by the increased traffic, from both setting up and taking down of the event, as well as hundreds of guests, many of whom will be intoxicated, arriving and leaving the premises, making using the lanes unsafe at certain times. Also, there is a public footpath in the field known as Area 1. Again, I would have concerns about children safely using this footpath whilst events are taking place. To summarise, as a holiday let providing accommodation for up to 20 guests, there have already been a number of disturbances in the past, with loud music being played late at night and into the early hours of the morning from the veranda. Due to the typography of the land, the noise is amplified and travels through the valley. As you can see from this photo, which is the final photo that I would like to show.
Yeah, we have seen that.
Thank you. It's actually taken from my driveway. The veranda faces our property and that of a few other properties, all of which have already been affected by noise pollution. Allowing 200 people at a time to use Woodbank for events and parties will have a huge detrimental effect on residents' lives. To quote the Human Rights Act, 1998, Article 1, Protection of Property, every natural or legal person is entitled to the peaceful enjoyment of his possessions. I would ask, is it right that for the financial gain of one person, that families with young children and elderly individuals alike cannot enjoy their own homes? Not only has the applicant not taken into account the negative impact on residents, they have also not taken into account the impact on nature. We all have a duty of care to protect our environment. Finally, I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that there are numerous wedding and events venues within a short distance of Woodbank, with the right infrastructure in place to facilitate such events. On behalf of the residents of Lanhennock, this application is not acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Perhaps if I just to clarify before we move on to the next representative of that. Obviously, Environmental Health here today haven't got an objection, but they will answer then any queries on the noise element for everybody present today of why what they've actually done over and above the report. So perhaps that will be done later after all the residents have spoken, and then just to sort of tie in how Environmental Health got that extra bit to the report itself. But I wanted to interject here, just to clarify the times, because I think it was mentioned it was until 1:30 and 2 o'clock. Just for clarity, really, that has in fact changed. It's not that time at all. I'm sure the solicitor acting on behalf of the applicants will point that out as well. But it is until 11 o'clock for the live music and recorded music. Outside on the veranda finishes at 11 o'clock also. And you've got the alcohol sales then going until 1 o'clock indoors, and again 11 o'clock outside as well. So just for clarity purposes, it doesn't go until 1:30 or 2 o'clock. All right, so I'll pass it back to the residents with their representation. Just want to clarify what the change was on the licence itself. Okay. I think it's Owen Evans, I think, who's next to speak.
I'm just wondering, Mr. Jones, do you want to question each speaker after they've spoken, or do you want to leave it to the end?
I think probably leaving it to the end will be useful. I mean, perhaps I can tell you now what I intend to ask, because I think it's a single question. and then those who sit by and we can think about it. And the question would be, what conditions would they propose over and above those suggested by the responsible
Okay, we'll leave
authorities?
that until later then. Mr. Owen Evans, please.
Hello, yes. I must apologise, I'm not the best public speaker and I haven't made a formal speech or anything. I just wanted to express some of the concerns I had. Thank you for Caroline, because I thought she was excellent. The one concern I have, obviously, as a farmer in the area is the excess traffic, especially during harvest time. Sometimes it can be difficult, as it currently is, to operate the business. I'm currently not milking cows at the moment, but I have every intention to go back into milking, and this is of a grave concern of mine. It is a single track road with narrow passing places. Obviously during the summer, it's going to be I will be busier with moving of livestock and harvest vehicles, as it were, and it will be have a significant impact on my business. This hasn't been rectified. I have several other points. There's no parking facilities at Woodbank to accommodate hospitality vehicles and potential customers and whatever. And it's a big concern of mine that these vehicles may park on the lanes, in gateways, blocking accesses. That's a huge concern of mine. The bridge has also been raised. There's damage to the bridge. It's recently been repaired at great expense by the council. I don't know whether there's any more plans to do further repairs to that vehicle, but that will have a significant impact on my business and Mr. Aspro's business as well, I would have thought, if that bridge is to be closed. I'm trying to think what else I get. Another main concern is the impact on, you say, my wealth and health being. As being a resident, it's very close to me. I know our neighbours have had complaints about the noise from the current business that Mr. Aspro conducts there. And the venue's been reversed, so it'll be more of a problem for mine than theirs, which doesn't seem fair on me or them. But it is a considerable amount of noise that comes from there. Another concern I have is that he says that anybody being drunk and disorderly will be evicted from the premises. Having lived in the area for 30 plus years, I found it very difficult to accommodate a taxi to get from the area. If these disorderly people are to be thrown out of the venue and into our domain, that's got a huge impact on me. I can't see how that can be addressed. You can wait regularly for 2 hours for a taxi to come out. If it's on the weekends, Fridays, Saturdays, you won't get a taxi out there. So if people are to be ejected from the property, it's going to be us, the local community, that's going to carry the burden of that. I don't know how that can be addressed, or if it can be addressed at all. I'm trying to think of anything else. There are other things. I'm flustering a bit here at the moment. As I said, I'm not the best public speaker. I do apologise for that. Trying to think now. Yeah, it was also mentioned about the people that walk the road. My mother's an elderly woman in her 80s. She walks the road, as most of the community will know. She's known for it. It will be a concern. I know she is concerned of that. You know, there are people on horses use the road regularly. Yeah, it's not appropriate, I'm afraid. That's my point. And to have a licensed premises there as well, I just can't believe that this is even being considered, to be honest with you. But yeah, that's all I got to say. I think at the moment I'm flustered a bit, but I do apologise.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Evans. Much appreciated. The next speaker is Mr. Alan Thomas. Is Mr. Thomas? Oh, I can see, yes. Fine, thank you.
Hello there. I've been a resident of Lanhennock for about 52 years now. I was born and raised in the area. I'd like to reiterate most of the comments made by Caroline and Owen, because they cover off all of our concerns. Some of the concerns with the noise assessment, I'm sure they've tried to make allowance for the noise which they expect to come from that venue. What I wonder is whether they take into consideration wind, because I know from a fact we can actually hear Clean Fair, which is 2.5 miles away, when that has got the wind coming in the right direction? Does it also take into effect drunken party revellers shouting, singing when they're leaving the premises? With regards to the traffic, it is effectively a one-way road with a few passing places along. Once you increase the traffic by 30 to 40 vehicles a day, there's going to be tremendous commotion there. There'll be, especially if the livestock is being moved along the roads at the time. My other concern is this is a commercial venture which is taking place in the locality. Local residents who have moved into the area will have moved into that area because they've wanted to enjoy the peace and tranquility of that area and the lifestyle that they're getting now. For me, there's a premium to be paid for this. A lot of people have made sacrifices to move into that area. They won't have gone on big holidays. They won't have spent money where other people will. They have concentrated their efforts into moving into that area. As such, any future sale of their properties, I can see that having a huge impact on the prices that they've paid for. As far as I see it, the commercial venture is a financial gain to the company that wants to employ the venture, but it's at a cost to the local residents. As Caroline stated earlier, there's any amount of wedding venues in the area. Most of them would be clamouring for the opportunity to hold the weddings which the proposed venue is going to have. I'd also like to bring into question the fact that it's based on, I think it was either 14 or 15 events a year. I would just like to know who's actually going to be policing that number, or if it is policed. There's also concern, we've got one countryside policeman who is travelling from Abergavenny to Caerleon, and he's responsible for all areas. If there are any issues out there, it's not policed. I totally uphold Owen's view that drunken revellers leaving parties, some of them are going to miss taxis, some of them are going to miss lifts. They're going to be struggling to get home. Depending on the state of them, they could be ending up in Owen's agricultural properties. We, as a community, my family have been in the area for 100 plus years. We've got 3 family farms, along with neighbouring friends. We'll all be very disappointed that this licence is issued.
Have you completed your statement? Yeah?
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Marr, sorry.
No, he's not.
I think Mr. Collins is not actually doing any representation today. Just a few little pointers there, really. I know Mrs. Caroline Thomas mentioned about numerous wedding events in the area. Just for, again, clarity, is every application has to be treated on its own merit. You can't take into consideration other venues which offer same sort of entertainment sort of side of it. With regards, I know it was mentioned, the gentleman, Alan Thomas, mentioned about financial implications. Again, it's only the 4 licensing objectives that can be taken into consideration under the Licensing Act itself. There was concerns, I believe, on conditions if the licence is granted, of it being policed 15 hours per day, 15 events per year, I should say. There is always the review option if that is founded. It doesn't necessarily have to be the police in attendance, in effect. It's if the evidence is there, then it can be brought back to committee, just so you're mindful of that as well, and also people in the audience here are mindful of that fact as well. Perhaps before we go on to the solicitor, then we tie in environmental health, because there may be some questions that anything that the solicitor may want to sort of add to, because there's a lot of noise implications that obviously has been raised as well today. So perhaps if I introduce Hero Wynne.
Before you do it, Mr. Martin.
Martin Jones is the solicitor. Yeah,
No,
yeah.
so apologies. No, I wasn't expecting to. I haven't prepared anything, but I would like to say I fully support everything that I've heard so far.
Oh, okay, fine. Right, Mr.
Pass you to Hero Wynne, please.
Hugh Owens.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Chair. Environmental Health consider applications with regard to one of the key licensing objectives, the prevention of public nuisance, and in particular, therefore, the implications of proposals for music to cause excessive disturbance. The proposals for live and recorded music with regard to A, location, B, permitted hours, and C, frequency, have been amended significantly by the applicant since the initial application was submitted in January. Initially, this section, in early February, submitted an objection to the application. The proposals at that time included internal music with a 12:30 a.m. finish, that's inside the house, external music in 3 marquee areas marked on the plans as areas 1, 2, and 3 to finish at midnight. And our objection was based on the number of dwellings in the locality, the closest to the house being approximately 150, 160 metres distance, the anticipated low background levels, especially in evening and night hours. The noise management plan that was submitted by the applicant contained insufficient detail with regard to how they intended to control music. The late hour of outdoor music and the cumulative impact of potentially a large number of events. So on the basis of those points, we objected. Subsequently, following our objection was submitted, on the 20th of February, a noise assessment was submitted by InAcoustics. And this amended the proposal significantly. Crucially, from our point of view, controls were provided for indoor music, and in particular, a proposed maximum decibel level. In addition, and most importantly, music outdoors to be held only on the veranda and area 2 and to finish at 11 p.m. The total number of external events held in the 3 marquee areas were not to exceed 15 per year, with no more than 12 in July and August. And a suite of noise management controls for music played in area 2 were proposed. In our view, there remains clearly the potential for music to be audible in the vicinity of the nearest dwellings, particularly during evening hours as the background noise levels drop. However, again, in our opinion, there is sufficient distance between the music area and the dwellings that there is scope for events to be held, and if managed properly, to avoid causing substantial disturbance and unreasonable levels of noise. Therefore, Environmental Health withdrew its objection, subject to a number of conditions which are recommended and attached in the report.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Could I just add that it's 15 events over the whole year. It is actually 10 and not 12 between July and August. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jones.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to begin, if I may, just to give a bit of context. There's an element of repetition. Ms. Wynn's report is extremely helpful in setting things out objectively and telling us what we're dealing with. So if you give me a short element of repetition as to what we're dealing with here. You'll have read, members of the subcommittee, that Woodbank is an existing business. So this is a movement onwards, a development of an existing business. Until 5 years ago, Mr. and Mrs. Asprey were living there. They then developed it, having moved out, developed it as a holiday accommodation venue. That's been Mrs. Asprey's business, and she's raised that business up such that it's now got a 5-star Visit Wales accreditation. My submission is that it's contributing to the local economy. It isn't the only business in the area, as you read, but it's contributing to the local economy in that way. What next for it?
Just a second. Sorry, you must let the gentleman speak.
Well, can I say this as a preface before I say anything else? I've been to a number of these meetings, as I know members of the subcommittee have. I'm not going to get through this without saying things that some of those behind me don't like to hear. Can I say this? It's unfortunate we're in this situation. Mr. and Mrs. Asprey aren't some remote business who've come in from a long way away. They used to live there. Mrs. Asprey is going to be hands-on at that property, and one never likes to fall out with one's neighbours, and I don't want to do anything to aggravate the situation. It's right that a subcommittee has the utmost regard to honestly held fears on the behalf of those in the vicinity. I intend no disrespect to those people holding those fears. But the basis of my submission today is going to be that we decide these things on evidence, and we have to look at the evidence that exists. Having made that preface, then I'll return to what I was saying. So we have an existing business, a successful existing business, but the plan is now to move it on. That plan is dependent on two things. It's dependent on a number of things, but two principal things. One is a license, that's why we're here today. The second is a change of use by way of planning. You'll have read that a pre-application has been made. The full application is ready, but my advice was, well, let's see what happens today, see what comes out of today, particularly in relation to ours, and then we can move on to that rather than going down a twin track and potentially causing confusion. The intention is not to radically change the way in which the business operates. It's a successful accommodation business. That's still going to continue. That isn't going. That's still going to be a significant occupation of that property. That means that it isn't going to be used for events 24/7. That isn't the application. It isn't going to be used for events when there are existing bookings for the persons who are accommodating the building. It can accommodate up to 20 guests. These things are let a considerable time in an event in advance. What it's going to do is it's going to offer another venue for weddings and for other sorts of events. Some of them will be corporate events. And it's relevant to note that we have, down the road, we have the International Convention Centre being completed. You will have...
Sorry, could you please be quiet?
You will have read, it's been referred to, helpfully by Ms. Wynne, you will have read in Appendix H the supportive documents, the documents that come from various of those who are concerned with commerce and with events and tourism. One of the supportive letters is from ICC because, of course, they point out that that venue is going to be able to accommodate 5,000 people. It'll bring people into the area, that's the plan. But that has to be underscored then by the ability to accommodate people and accommodate them in the sort of standard of accommodation that many of those attending those events would expect. That doesn't exist at Celtic Manor or even in the near environs. So this building is also intended to offer an additional space for those people as a satellite in relation to those events, and hence the support it gathers from that. So the intention is to be able to offer wedding events, to be able to offer business events, corporate events. It's not intended to be able to offer pop festivals. Some of the wilder imaginings one might have just aren't the case here. This is not the intention of the business. We are going to have a capacity of up to 100 people as a maximum for an event. That would then be dependent upon the use of marquees. Perhaps I can break off at this point before I return to addressing some of the representations to look again, if I may, at Ms. Wynn's report, and just perhaps we can just mark it up with the changes that have now been proposed as a result of the environmental health involvement. So the use of marquees, you've heard it said twice, but just to be clear, use of marquees, a total of 15 inside marquees you see under 3.1. Well, it's now, as you've heard, confirmed by our colleagues, it's confirmed as no more than 10 during July and August. 15 per annum, no more than 10 during July and August. Then if one looks at the next page and the licensing objectives, the fourth of those, the protection of children from harm, a minor element to be added here, but where young people, children, are present at events, then an adult must be present. So that's an additional requirement. And then most significantly, I think, as you've heard, this is paragraph 3.5. Under hours of licensable activities, well, no change to that which is printed, but under live music and recorded music, a significant change. So the indoor area, the house, in other words, shown in Appendix A, but the house. Music there to be until 12:30. The outdoor areas will now limited to Area 2 only. So as Mr. Owen Evans rightly said, this is the area which is, I'm going to hold up Appendix A. This is the area which is nearest to his property, but it's the one which is to the west of the house, Area 2. That is now the only property which recorded music or live music is to be played. And that area, the cessation point, the stopping point, is 11 p.m. If one marks up the report in that way, then effectively you bring us up to where we are now. But whilst I'm talking about noise, I'm going to suggest that it's right to say, as is said within the report in its clear law, that there are certain elements of nuisance which fall to other tribunals, including a planning subcommittee, to consider. But you have to interpret nuisance broadly at these subcommittee hearings. So I don't say that you can cut out noise nuisance. You can't. It's an irrelevant consideration. But it's a consideration like any other, which you judge on the evidence. And in this case, there is scientific evidence accepted by those who have the expertise from environmental health, which shows the mitigation measures that are to be used. I'm going to read them if I may. I know that the subcommittee will have seen them, but I'd like to read them so that those behind me can hear them as well. The mitigation measures in relation to the house are that internal music noise levels are not to exceed 95 decibels, moderated A. What that means is that the sound is to be kept below that volume, and that decibel measurement, I'll be corrected by those who know better if I'm wrong, but that decibel measurement is a special one because it records not just the overall volume, but the sorts of sounds which can cause greater nuisance. So the relevance of the A at the end of decibel is because it's a particular sort of measurement which records those noises which can travel further and become potentially a greater nuisance. So internal music noise levels not to exceed 95 decibels, while patio doors are held open for ventilation. Patio doors to be maintained in the closed position as far as practicable after 11 p.m. and music on the terrace area to be turned off by midnight 30. Then goes on to consider the marquee area, so the area to the west of the house. There's to be a defined performance area for live bands towards the north area of the marquee, with public announcement speakers orientated to the south-southeast, away from the closest off-site receptors. So unbundling the jargon, away from the nearest residents. This would direct the sound across the valley and away from the neighbouring properties. Any marquee apertures, the doors, in other words, to be orientated to the south-southeast, away from the closest receptors, the residents, in order to ensure that sound propagation is focused towards the southeast. The introduction of an approved list of live bands, with whom working arrangements will be made with regard to song choice and playing style, so as to minimise noise generation and crowd involvement. This would necessarily minimise the use of bands with acoustic drums and horn sections where possible. However, where these are incorporated, drummers will necessarily use noise reduction devices, such as hot rods or brushes, and noise reduction playing techniques, such as avoiding rim shots. With any horn sections using mutes to minimise the sound generation of the instruments. As I've already said, we record here live bands and DJ sets to cease by 11 p.m. The limitation of marquee music events to a maximum of 15 events per year and no more than 10 during July and August. Immediate site neighbours and the licensing authority to provide with site contact details for event management and provision of feedback should issues be raised with regard to the level of noise generated by marquee events. Noise levels at NMP1, that's the access road, so these are the sampling points chosen by the consultants. Noise levels at the access road and at the edge of the garden plateau, as marked within figures within this report, not to exceed a noise level of 55 decibels. I'm grateful for the opportunity to read that at some length. I'm not going to attempt, you'll be relieved here to read any further matters from that report, but I think it's right to say that the report was predicated on this, working out what the ambient noise is like now, working out how much it would increase using these measures, these noise management measures, and checking that that did not increase the ambient noise to more than a negligible level, and I'm using the word in the report, negligible level for those who are closest. So it's an extremely conservative report, in my experience, which is intended to really significantly reduce any facility for noise nuisance in the surrounding area. I'll deal with some of the matters then, if I may, slightly more briefly. So far as transport is concerned, transport in and out, that's something which can be of relevance to a licensing committee, but it's perhaps at the fringes of relevance in some respects. I can indicate that there is adequate parking. There's a parking plan, there's parking for all the vehicles. There's a 300 yard, roughly, drive. That drive is able to accommodate the sorts of vehicles which would be travelling to collect guests at the end of an event. Many guests, those who are staying in the house, would of course be staying overnight, or be leaving the next day in any event. There's sufficient parking to accommodate all of those vehicles. There are existing taxi companies who already service the existing business. They've been contacted specifically in relation to this. They've provided written responses confirming their ability to work with the venue to provide not only a frequency of service so that people get collected properly, but also to ensure that they're using modern apps so that people know when they're coming. There's the minimum hanging around. There's no need for drivers to be leaving engines running, getting up and going and going back out again. All of this collection of individuals from the events will take place on the premises of the property. None of it is taking place in the lane. As I've indicated, there's a drive, there's more than adequate parking. A little more peripherally, I'll address it unless you find it now helpful. We've been provided with the photographs of the damage to the wall. This is the wall above a culvert, which is quite adjacent to the entrance to the drive to Mrs. Asprey's property. The history of this, I think it's worth indicating, is this. We know it's more than 5 years ago because it's prior to the operation as a accommodation, as holiday accommodation. More than 5 years ago, the council did substantial works to the culvert underlying this area. Within a month, the crack that you can see in the wall appeared, and that was a concern to Mr. and Mrs. Asprey, and therefore they contacted the council in relation to it. That's a matter of record, to ask whether there was any cause of concern and whether there was any need for any reparative work to be undertaken. So they were concerned about that, but we reject a suggestion that the licensing of this venue is going to give rise to a significant risk of nuisance. I suppose it's best suggested to fall under in relation to the situation of that wall. If it were to deteriorate, and there is already heavy traffic on that road, as you've heard, in the form of farm vehicles and the like, if it were to deteriorate, then yes, it would be a cause of concern. It's not a relevant matter so far as a licensing hearing is concerned in my submission. I'm going to then also deal briefly, if I may, with some of the other matters raised by way of representation from those in the community locally. Perhaps we can set the photograph of the property provided by Mrs. Evans in context. I think I can do this very simply. Do you have Appendix A in front of you? Could I invite you to look at Appendix A briefly?
What page is that on, please? What number page?
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgive you. Appendix D.
Yes, we've seen that, yes.
Right.
So, yeah.
Okay. I'm at risk of stating the bleeding obvious, I might be, but if one looks at Appendix D, as I'm rightly corrected, you can see the property in the driveway, I think, from which Ms. Emmons said she took the photograph. The perspective that we can see in that photograph is looking through, I'll be corrected or I'm wrong, the set of trees, isn't it, to this property. That's a 300-yard driveway there. That gives you a proper perspective, I think, of the distance, which is shown in that photograph. It's Mrs. Thomas, I'm sorry, not Mrs. Evans. The intention so far as the egress of vehicles coming and going is concerned is this. There'll be a mixture of private vehicles, taxis, larger vehicles, eight-person vehicles, some minibuses. There's a facility potentially for midi buses, which I'm told contain 24 to 33 people, but the majority are going to be in smaller vehicles than that. They'll be staggered, and there'll be event management to make sure that they aren't all leaving at the same time or all arriving at the same time. I've already mentioned there are pre-designated taxi firms who are aware of the need to attend promptly and to give advance notice of their arrival. It's right to say, of course, that there's already current activity, business activity at the premises. People come and go. If there are 20 guests, there might be 10, 20 cars that are potentially coming and going. They'll come and go during the course of the day as well, if they're staying there. They'll have deliveries. They'll have deliveries from Tesco's or Sainsbury's. So this isn't a change from zero. This is a change on event days to a higher profile of traffic. There is a traffic report which has been prepared for the purposes of the planning application, and that suggests that at peak, the increased traffic flow would be up to, and this is at peak, the increased traffic flow would be up to one vehicle every 2 minutes. An issue has been raised in relation to waste disposal, not orally today in fairness, but it's raised within your papers. There is a commercial waste arrangement already in place with Monmouthshire County Council. That will continue. There had been a problem recently where it wasn't collected. And Mrs. Asper has very promptly addressed that, and she's had a response from the council confirming that won't happen again in the future. There was a concern you'll have seen raised within the documentation, not raised orally today, and I understand that and I respect that, but there was a concern raised as to the possibility of needles or other drug detritus. I don't think I need to say too much about that. You need to base these things upon evidence rather than upon fears, which might be honestly held, but I'm afraid are not based in fact. There's been concern about the lighting. As far as the lighting is concerned, there are pillar lights on the gates to the entrance to the drive, along the drive, down to the curtilage of the property. It's at lower ground level. There's lighting at the terrace and garden levels. It's a mixture of various forms of lighting, including light-sensitive floodlights for security. You've heard that closed-circuit television has been implemented. That was one of the recommendations of the responsible authorities. The Information Commissioner's Office has already given its sanction for that, its licence. This is intended to be a wedding venue. a marriage licence has also been granted for the venue. There's reference to fireworks. I'm doing this, I'm sorry, slightly slavishly, but I hope to provide perhaps some peace of mind to some of those behind me. So far as fireworks are concerned, it is possible that there would be events on the 5th of November and New Year, potentially. That would need to be by application to Mrs. Asperow. She's only going to approve those if they're appropriate, and if they're appropriate, being mindful of the needs of neighbouring properties. The question I was going to ask, I don't think I did actually ask it tonight, but the question I was going to ask those who live locally is there something else that they would wish done by way of condition? I think from what I've heard, the reality is that, and I say this disrespectfully, they'd rather it didn't happen at all. All right, but we're not in that situation. What the Licensing Act 2003 suggests is that commerce ought to be able to go on, and that we all ought to be able to live our lives and conduct business, but not at the cost of severe disruption to those around us. My submission is that there is a very, very good level of care taken here to prevent any level of disruption, any level of nuisance. Mrs. Asperow isn't remote from this venture. She's going to be the designated premises supervisor if you approve the application. She's going to have real legal duties under that. She has a personal licence. She's going to be authorising each sale of alcohol. She's aware of her duties as far as that's concerned, and she's aware of the need to make this business work responsibly if it's to be successful in the future. I don't want to strike a negative note, but it's right to say, as Ms. Wynne already has, and forgive me, as Ms. colleague already has, that in the event that what I've told you today isn't right, and that there is a significant concern after the event, then there is a mechanism for that. There's a mechanism for that through complaint, either to police or licensing, and if needs be, that mechanism is dealt with by way of review. But the proper approach at this stage, as I've submitted on more than one occasion, is to treat the application on the basis of the evidence that exists, rather than fears of future events, to condition it appropriately, but otherwise as the Licensing Act 2003 says in its ethos, to allow responsible commercial development. By way of practicality, I'm therefore suggesting that the operating schedule would include as conditions the limitation of live music and recorded music to outdoor area 2 between the hours of 8 a.m. and 11 p.m. Monday to Sunday. I'm suggesting that the condition in relation to the marquee would be that the marquee is only operated on 10 occasions during July and August, and on 15 occasions altogether, and that live recorded music is only played, forgive me, within area 2 between 8 and 11 p.m. and until midnight 30, between 8 and midnight 30, within, excuse me, within the house. My cold is catching up with me somewhat, sorry. What I haven't addressed you on is Ms. Asperow's background, her curriculum vitae, effectively her ability to act as the DPS. I don't see that as being a primary issue within the papers. If it's something that concerns you, then either I or Mrs. Asperow, I'm sure, could address you in relation to it. Is there anything else I can assist the subcommittee with at this point?
If I can just clarify on your submission, you mentioned the veranda in Area 4, and I think you remember it's been a slight oversight. You said midnight. It is in fact 11 o'clock as per the original application. I think you cleared that up a bit later then as well.
Yes, I think I was reading the acoustic report, but it's not. It's 11, not midnight 30. Thank you.
Mr. Owen, there's a question I have to you. We're talking about it, certainly in terms of patio doors being closed as far as is practicable. Would you like to say something about it? Because if there's noise inside and the patio doors are open, it's going to come out.
Thank you, Chair. I think that's very much a goodwill condition. proposed by the applicant. From my perspective, the potential for disturbance from events held at Woodbank are from the live and recorded music which would be played outside, in particular. Music which is played indoors, inevitably there's going to be a degree of additional mitigation to that noise. I think we have to be practical, but from events held inside during the summer period, but there's certainly going to be a potential for windows and doors to be opened. Ultimately, what we find with events such and premises such as this is that there's always going to be the potential for noise to be audible at a given distance away, and particularly at a distance of around about 150, 200 metres away, where the background levels are quiet. It is a judgment call from our point of view to consider, nevertheless, is there sufficient scope for the applicant to be able to control and properly manage events so as not to cause excessive disturbance. So, for example, it will be to the applicant's judgment to decide what sort of bands, what sort of entertainment they hold. And we all know that the extreme ends of a spectrum on that side of things. We try to instill, and based on the recommendations by the acoustic report, noise limits. But nevertheless, there will be the potential for music to be audible, but that is reliant on the applicant to properly control and properly manage. And if they don't, then there is a recourse for complaints from the residents to be made to Environmental Health for us to investigate those complaints with regards to the statutory nuisance legislation. And indeed, as Mr. Jones mentioned, for a review of a licence to be called.
Right, thank you. Just a second, just a quick question. You already accommodate people at the premises?
Yes, yes.
So, in relation to that, how many families, couples, and consequential cars as a consequence, following on from that, how many would that be roughly?
Well, we sleep 20. So we have people that come just for a holiday. We get walkers, we get cyclists. Sometimes we get people that celebrate, say, an 80th birthday or a 50th birthday. So 20 will sleep, but they might invite their friends for the day to help celebrate.
Okay, thank you. The lady there, your name misses me at the moment because I got a long list of names, but yeah, you wanted to say something.
I did, thank you. During my representation, I kept to under 10 minutes and I kept it all relevant against the 4 licensing objectives. I'd like to ask why the applicant's representative was able to continue beyond 10 minutes and, quite honestly, to make many points that were totally irrelevant regarding the conference centre, etc. We're not here to debate the existing business. We understand it's a holiday let. We are not here to debate it. We're not saying it's not a successful business. It does have some problems for neighbours, certainly at some points, not all of the time. It was not all relevant, and the time went on. I'd like to know why, please. Thank you.
Perhaps if I can clarify that, and Mr. May also want to clarify it as well. The statutory instrument, which with regards to hearings, give a guideline of 10 minutes per application, per person making a representation. And as you can imagine, there's a number of yourselves making the representation. But in the interest of a fair hearing, the gentleman on behalf of the applicant was in fact addressing all the points that was raised, which would obviously be necessary for that fair hearing. That's why he was given that time, and you're quite rightly been able to respond back at this stage as well and to clarify things any further.
I think that question, I'm prepared to take this question off you, please, and I want to come to my colleague then.
The question that I have that hasn't been addressed is the safety of pedestrians walking the lane, either during at night or during the mornings or any point at weekends. There are no pavements, it's an extremely narrow road. I actually ride along that road with my horses, and so do several other members of the village. And it is the only access to our village centre, which is obviously the already established pub, which is obviously very important to the community. I would like to know what's going to safeguard pedestrians along that road. With the increase in traffic, there are members of the public that walk late at night, as it is the only way you can access the facilities of the village without using a vehicle.
Yeah, I mean, that's already been mentioned about pedestrians along that particular road in earlier representation
But there was no clarification.
by the residents. Councillor Eason.
Thank you, Chair. I've got numerous comments, numerous questions from the representations you made, which are quite... was that? Yeah. You referred to walking and cycling, which I also picked up as being a concern, and horse riding. I do have a question about the fireworks. You come view that it'd be twice a year. I think fireworks are a scourge on society at the moment. They let off all sorts of times, and in the countryside they would affect the animals. I concerned about the crime, comments you make about crime and drunkenness, but the police have come of the view that they perceive the problem not to be there, as you might say. Regarding the the event centre, one of the members of the public mentioned a public footpath going through the site and the stream. Is it a public footpath or a public right-of-way? What access do the public really have for it? And on that basis, you mentioned children. What security would you have for your staff if children are in their own vicinity or property? I'll come back to more questions later.
If you have a look at the plan with the areas, which was it, Appendix A or D? Yeah, sorry.
Could you speak into that?
Yeah, if you look at the plan, if we pull up the plan, I'll show you where the right-of-way is.
So this is Appendix D, isn't it? So I've been corrected.
Yeah, can you show where the right-of-way is on that plan?
This is the property. Yeah, got that, yeah. So the right-of-way is... Oh, it's at the top of the other field. It's not, it's nothing to do with this section at all, the property. That's a separate field altogether.
My concern is, would children be at risk when you've got lots of visitors there, and are your staff qualified to support them?
Yes, that right-of-way, sorry for interrupting, but that right-of-way is...
Oh, yeah.
You
Okay,
go...
I prefer for someone to indicate they want to speak first. Because I didn't know
Right,
where that
please,
was
can I say something? Because...
Yes, yes.
Yes, thank you. The right-of-way goes past our house and a cottage. The field is up the top, and these people live up there, or used to live up there, and I'd like to know whether they'd like to live there now with all this going on. But no, please, I run a boarding cattery, and it's quiet. It's a quiet place, Lanhennock, and they're going to turn it into a riotous place. It's disgusting.
My question was the safety of children.
Well, it's for the safety of the children. We've got children in the house next door to us, and they play out. They're free to play where they want around the farm. But when strangers come through, we ended up with 15 Japanese gentlemen with little torches on their head down in our yard because we haven't complained about the business they've already got. But that's going on all the time. We've had things stolen from our sheds. We've had people now in the woods, the woodland that we own. All the fence has been broken away where their visitors go through. We love the wildlife and we love children, and I just think it's going to be diabolical what they're doing.
Perhaps I can answer with your concerns on the protection of children from harm. There is an added condition that they agreed to within the licence itself, which actually stipulates under the section for the new conditions, which was mentioned previously, was the children attending the premises should be accompanied by a responsible adult. So they put in measures with regards to children actually attending the venue. Obviously, that's what they would have to manage, is the actual licence and the venue itself, not children entering the premises. Just wanted to clarify that element of it. And one thing I did fail to mention when it was raised by Caroline Thomas, when the gentleman on behalf of the applicant referred to ICC Wales, it is actually formally it's part of the report. Obviously, we've got the objections here today, but there are 5 ones that are actually in support of the application, and they should not be overlooked as well as party to your decision today.
Yeah, that's right. We take all representations. Yeah, that's fine. Just a second. My colleague wants to make say something about noise.
I appreciate the report coming back where you put restrictions on noise, 11 o'clock at night, and I believe that your department do carry out checks on issues you make in the future, made in the past, sorry, for the future. In particular, I live 200 metres away from Caldergut Castle, where you put similar restrictions in place, and they are adhered to. And in that respect, I find that it depends on the wind, whether you get much ambient noise. Some nights there's nothing, other nights you get a lot. But I do feel that the reports that you put forward are substantial in taking this forward in terms of your monitoring in the future.
Answer your question. Sorry. With regard to fireworks, we are not permitting fireworks unless it's New Year's Eve or Christmas. If it's a real sticking point, I'm happy to forego those. But if we can have them for New Year and Christmas, that's fine. But as I said, it's not a real sticking point. And secondly, with the right-of-way, it is right on our boundary, as you can see on that diagram.
Regarding fireworks, yes.
Yeah.
I think they're a scourge on society because they use it all sorts of times of the year, and they do cause trouble for animals, pets, and things like that. And a lot of the fireworks they produce these days pollute the environment. Christmas Eve and other times, New Year's Eve, are traditional days, so I personally wouldn't find an objection.
Yes,
to that.
I totally agree. I would not allow anyone, unless it's Christmas or New Year, for the safety of the property, to use fireworks on my lawns. So I agree there.
May I check? Do we mean Christmas or do we mean bonfire night?
Oh, sorry. Bonfire night.
Can I just have there isn't actually
issues like can you switch that on, please? Yeah, issues such as you just mentioned are subject to licensing applications and permissions. The lady there, please.
Yeah, sorry, just to clarify, when we were talking about the safety of our children, we were actually talking about the safety of our own children. We live there and it's our home. I'm not really concerned about children with adults in the property or around the property in terms of Woodbank and if they're staying there. I'm concerned about my own children. It's our home. So I don't think it kind of went off on a tangent and it wasn't focused enough. Okay, so I just wanted to clarify that.
Safety is everyone's responsibility, regardless of.
It is. The point I was asking, though, was about the children's safety, our children. Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that.
Take that on board.
Can I just clarify one point? Obviously, you mentioned it isn't on the conditions currently about fireworks, but if they are willing, to put that on condition, perhaps that could be clarified that they're willing to put it as part of the condition.
Now, there's arms shooting up all over the place, and I'll be quite honest with you. You've already had representations, so I'm not going to go everywhere where there's an arm up. So I'll take the gentleman in the blue shirt first, please.
Hello there. Thanks for listening to me. Okay then. We were talking about the traffic and to and from, and with the taxis coming to and from Mr. Aspro's. I've had the pleasure of actually going down to Mr. Aspro's and going to a Fermention do, and I've driven down his driveway, which is approximately 300 yards. I don't dispute this. But my problem being is that only one vehicle, unless you've got a tank, which I do have, would be able to pass. So we're going to park vehicles belonging to people coming to and from the wedding venue on his 300-yard long drive. So wherefore are the taxis going to pick the clients up from if he has got people parked along his drive? You can't pass on his driveway.
Okay, we've got. Would you like to answer that, please?
Yes, we have got a car parking plan in your pack. I'm just trying to find it now.
I can show it on the computer. I'm not sure whether that's helpful, unless you can find it in your paper. But there are two measures, Pierre. First of all, there's the car park to the far west of the house, which is shown as having 28 spaces. But also, one would have to adapt to the size of the event. So if it's a large-scale event, one would need marshalling as well. Well, I'm sorry I don't have it in paper in front of me. I can hand that forward as a computer document if that's helpful. Shall I hand that forward? Oh, I'm sorry. I wonder if I've taken something which is with your colleagues in planning.
Okay,
Yes,
I'd
I'm sorry.
like to point also that you need to refer to the 4 key licensing objectives. I know
Yeah,
it's
and it is,
the driveways.
licensing, let's be quite clear, licensing is our remit, if I put it that way. Other issues such as the size of a car park and everything else is to do with another area of the council. It has nothing to do with licensing at this moment in time. I'll take that gentleman there, please.
Thank you. I'd like to make a comment about the protection of children, their safety. I think for the representation to say it's not a radical change to go from 20 guests to 100 guests is a bit of a stretch. It sounds like a very radical change. And also he said that we want to be based on evidence today, but the noise, the taxis, the traffic, they're actually all based on assumptions that we don't know. So I thought I'd just raise 2 elements of fact, which are published journal articles in the public domain. And there are many more if you go on Google Scholar. And that is that alcohol licenses are linked to numerous safety issues due to the greater consumption of alcohol. For example, litter in the countryside, broken glass, potentially drug remains.
Our concern is the licensing.
Yes, these are studies which show a link between alcohol licenses and these antisocial behaviours.
Anything that happens out on the countryside where people are throwing things out the windows of cars and so on.
Sorry, you're mishearing me. I'm saying that these are published journal articles linking alcohol licenses to litter, drug use, antisocial. And if that's not relevant to my children who live next door, then I'm not sure what else, because these are facts. These are facts of studies published, not assumptions of things that may or may not happen.
Could you switch that off a minute, please? Yeah. I'm not aware. Anything that happens and is a complaint, and a substantial complaint, there's a process where reviews take place. And I can tell you this, I've done a review on a particular property, and there was four representatives from the police there. There was a number of representatives from the local community, such as we are now, and we had to deal with it. Deal with it we did. But at this moment in time, we're talking about an increase in, a licensing application, not something that may or may not happen, and I have to stress that. If something happens as a consequence of that, obviously there's a concern. But this concern of ours, our process today is the licensing application of this particular property. And there's a number of arms up, and I'm sorry, but I'm not going to call you on. The lady who spoke before.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say, because I think there's obviously huge concerns here. I realise you can't listen to every single person here, but regarding the noise report and regarding the condition against the noise levels at 95 decibels, I'd like to point out that at 97 decibels, that's actually the equivalent to a plane taking off at 1 mile. I think that's quite relevant.
Do you want to say anything about that?
Again, just to repeat, and for the panel's information, I think looking at this application, it is quite clear that the biggest cause for concern about noise causing disturbance is going to be from music, which is going to be in the outdoor areas. That potentially could be managed without causing excessive disturbance. Equally, it may not be, and then there are controls and methods for those complaints to be investigated. The conditions that were proposed by the applicant are there to bring a degree of control to the proposal, and inevitably, if complaints were made, those then would be investigated appropriately.
Yeah, that's issues that we mentioned about noise and that, and that's the situation. I'll take a lady up the back.
Thank you. So I just want to, Mr Jones's comments, I just want to come back on some of those and just ask for a bit of clarification. So people keep talking a lot about only 15 external events, but from living very close to the house, you know, I look at that and go, that's 4 months of the year, especially during the summer, where I will have noise till 1:30 in the morning. You've also still got a licence, or you're looking at, giving a licence from 8 a.m. to 11 p.m, 365 days of the year. And they can have noise inside the house. Nearly every room in that house has patio doors that can be opened. And it will be warm in the house with 100 people in there. So as well as the 4 months of weekends, you've got to, potentially till 11 o'clock every night, with patio doors potentially opening. And, coming back to the environmental noise report, they're saying, I think your quote was, it potentially could be managed, but it's all potentials and we're all living there. So, in theory, it can be 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. We're talking corporate events, that's throughout the day, which is noise in the garden. We're talking at night. The solicitor also said live music may not be the intention, but the licence will allow live music. So I think one of the problems with this licence at the moment, one of the questions we had was, what would you allow? And I can't speak for everybody else here, but my concern is that the licence at the moment is allowing weddings, live music, noise during the day, noise till 11 o'clock at night. Patio doors can be open because they're trying to be managed by the people in the house. Well, if you're having a party there, you'll want the patio doors open. You'll have music. Taking Caroline's point, noise limited to 95 decibels. Well, I've just Googled it, and 90 decibels within 150 metres, which is the distance of their house, is a train whistle at 500 feet. Well, that is what's being allowed inside the house till 11 o'clock at night. It's the same as Caroline and the other surrounding neighbours having a train whistle at that distance. And I think a lot of this, I think from our perspective, it's unrealistic to expect people holding a wedding or a live event or anything to think about closing patio doors. They'll want to be on the veranda. It's a lovely property. It's fabulous. But it is the sort of property where people want to be outside, but it will affect our lives. And I think the licence at the moment, from my perspective, is very, very open. It's for a lot of hours, for a lot of days of the week.
Yeah, that's been the message from the residents, and all residents just about, quite loud and quite clear. We have to determine as to what is acceptable in terms of licensing, and we will make a decision upon that today in terms of the hours and everything else. So, yeah, it's no point in anyone saying it's going to be this, that, or something else. What will happen is we'll make a determination as to what and how long the licensing and the sale of alcoholic drinks and that sort of thing, how long that can take place. That's within our remit, and this is what we will do today. And I appreciate everything that's been said, particularly about the traffic, about the safety and all that sort of thing. We've heard that loud and clear, and we know that there are people in support of the application, but I haven't seen anyone here who was in support of it. But that apart, we have to make a decision on the application, which we will do. And I'll take the gentleman here, and then I think we need to call it a day, other than I'd like this gentleman to sum up, possibly on behalf of Mrs. Aspro.
Okay, thank you. I'd just like to say we live in a cottage right next to the property, and they hold a successful holiday let there at the moment. Usually there's around about 20 guests, not every weekend, but most weekends. And to be fair, most of the people go there, they enjoy the countryside, and they go there to actually enjoy that. But unfortunately, when they do have hen parties or something like that, then when they open the doors, the noise for us is incredible. We may as well be sat in the front room with them when those doors are open. So to have 100 people there plus, because they can't really police that, it's going to be unbearable for us. And I think probably the chances are we would probably have to, well, I'm not sure what we would be able to do, to be honest with you. So it would totally ruin our lives.
Thank you. I think we've heard a fair representation from the residents. We've heard everything, and I'll allow you now, and then after I come to Mr. Jones. Thank you.
I haven't responded much yet, but I did I have a few responses I'd like to say. Miss Aspro said that she had about 20 visitors accommodated now, which not many of us here locally have many complaints to. But she said she regularly has about 10 cars there, which I would say was about right. If she has 250 cars, 250 guests, I make the assumption is 125 cars, and she made the submission that she has parking for 28 cars.
Can I stop you? There won't be 250.
250 guests, I believe the application is for?
No.
200, okay. I'll withdraw 25 cars off that and make it 100, but she's still 73 cars short of car parking spaces, which inevitably will be parked in my gateways and fields and what have you. That's one point. The other point I have of interest is she said that she has 10 events between July and August. I'm not sure whether she's aware of the countryside, but that's peak harvest time for most of my friends and farming colleagues. It would be a massive concern of mine if this was granted. My other concern I have is the environmental health inspector said that 200-metre noise levels would be considerable of 200-metre levels. Why was nobody consulted on that by the environmental health, and why were we not asked for consultation on it? And the other point is, in their legal representation, he said they used to live there. That is the point to a lot of people in this room today. They used to live there, they don't now. Would they accept it if it was happened to there?
I want Mr. Owen to say something about what you just said. Would you like to make a response?
Yes, Chair, I'm not too sure what the question was.
Why was the locals not consulted on it as regards the environmental health impact study?
That's not a matter for environmental health. Environmental health...
well, not noise levels, sorry.
Environmental health have to look at the information which is submitted by the applicant and make a decision on the basis of that. Similarly, with all other license applications or planning applications, we make our own professional judgment on the application submitted, and it's not for us to consult with nearby residents or anybody else.
Thank you. I think I'll ask you to wind up on behalf of the applicant now, please, and then we will retire.
I'll do so very swiftly, I think. So far as noise is concerned, my fundamental submission is that noise is the relevant issue here. That's the one that is addressed under the licensing objectives.
No, just a second. Let the gentleman speak, please.
I've addressed matters far more widely. I did so in the hope that some reassurance might have been provided by addressing the wider concerns, even though they don't fall directly within the remit of our licensing subcommittee. Don't think I've succeeded in that. I can sense the mood in the room. The point is this, that when one addresses the licensing objectives, then the real issue here is the noise issue, and we don't for one moment suggest that that's not a proper issue to be objectively considered. But it has been objectively considered. The noise report has addressed it in the best way possible by having ambient checks and the background noise and comparing the changes that would then be brought about by the events that we're talking about being licensed in this case. And the changes are very, very small changes. We're talking about 0.9% change in the ambient level within the area outside the house. So it isn't possible, I'm afraid, for me to summarise the report in a few sentences. What I would say is it's an objectively, scientifically based report which has been considered carefully by our colleagues in environmental health, and they've been able to see the basis upon which this provides the proper noise mitigation. That's an evidential basis upon which to work my submission. I'll say it once more. The intention here is not to create a business which creates aggravation for one's neighbours. The intention here is to create an evolution of an existing basis, a business on a sustainable and commercially appropriate basis. One doesn't do that by creating enemies of one's neighbours. So the intention going forward, whether or not we achieve it today, will be to make sure that this is run in a proper and responsible way.
Thank you. I'd like to remind you that before we started, you were the residents were allowed to appoint representatives to state what were the concerns of the residents. There were people who were actually delegated to do that. I did extend it to others, and I didn't have to, but I did, just so I know what everybody's thinking. We have heard, I think we've heard everything that we want to hear. Do you have any questions at the moment? Right. In which case, we will now retire.
Mr. Chairman, sorry to interrupt, but I wasn't asked to respond before, but I'd like to respond now. I'm a local resident. I've probably been on the bottom road for perhaps the longest or the second longest of all. If it's an open meeting, surely I should be able to have a chance to speak and suggest what I say.
Well, how long are you going to take? I'll give you...
I've got several points, some of the points have been mentioned today.
Well, if they've already been mentioned before,
not really, no. I'm talking about the noise that is. We live possibly a mile away from the property, downwind.
Yeah, we've heard
Mr.
that.
Aspro has basically an Airbnb going at the moment. I think that was thrust upon us. No one was ever asked about that. As another gentleman said, most of the guests there are very good. But if you get a hen party or whatever, they come through our lane. There is no sign at all on Woodbank.
Could I say that someone's mentioned that as well?
They can't even put a sign on the end of the lane saying it's Woodbank. They're looking on their sat-navs. It brings them through the lane, 2 miles of one-track lane. Hen parties, stag parties, who checks the decibel levels of them shouting and screaming at 12 o'clock at night?
I think all that's been said.
No, it hasn't.
Yeah, well,
this is a local resident, and
it's been said
I'm disgusted
about
what Mr. Aspro says, that, they're very hands-on. There's no even a notice saying where Woodbank is. The noise is terrible on sometimes, and it's going to get even worse. You're talking about the decibels on bands, mufflers on flutes or whatever. We don't want the noise at all. We live in a village,
I think,
village.
with respect, I think those points have been well made by others within this representation.
But perhaps I haven't done the same. Perhaps I haven't had the education the other people have. But I just want to state my point that we don't want it there at all.
No, we will adjourn, and we are to make our deliberations. I couldn't tell you how long that's going to take, but we will do it, and we will do it properly, and regardless of the time. And I will be taking a couple of people with me because we need advice as well.
Chairman, just to...
Suspect I've been trying not to answer every point for reasons that will be obvious, but I think Mrs. Aspru want to say.
No, we won't hear anymore.
Thank you, Chair, because you did close the meeting. Thank you.
Chair, just to mention that whilst the panel retires, the live streaming will actually be continuing. So just to say that if there are any microphones on, it will be picked up. So even if there's some microphones off, there might be a bit of residual noise. So just to be aware of that.
2, 3 or something. But I thought, you know what?
Right, thank you all for being. Oh, where are they? Oh. Right, thank you very much for waiting while we deliberated. We have come to a decision, and what we've decided to do is this has to be written down for obvious reasons. And I asked Mr. John Rogers, our solicitor, to read out the decisions of this panel. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the subcommittee has considered this application for a premises licence for Woodbank, Llanhennach. We have heard representations from the applicant, and we've also taken into account any other written representations and objections received. In reaching the decision, we've had regard to the Licensing Act 2003, the licensing objectives, the Council's statement of licensing policy, and the guidance issued by the Home Office. In taking into account all of the above matters, any other relevant legislation, for example, the Human Rights Act 1998, and all the relevant circumstances of the application. The following points were discussed. The subcommittee took the view that issues of access and road safety were primarily a matter to be considered as part of the forthcoming planning application. The subcommittee were particularly concerned about issues of noise nuisance and felt that there should be some additional restrictions on hours. Basically, the subcommittee have decided to grant the application on the conditions set out in section 3.5 of the officer's report, subject to the following changes. Supply of alcohol outdoors shall be restricted to Area 2 on the plan at Appendix D. And then inside supply of alcohol shall end at midnight. Of the maximum number of 15 marquee weddings, no more than 10 to take place in the months of July and August. The committee noted and wished to impose the additional condition offered by the applicant to restrict fireworks to New Year's Eve and the 5th of November only in any year. So the applicant may appeal to the Magistrates' Court against this decision within 21 days of being notified of the decision. And the applicant and the objector may appeal, I should say. The applicant and objector will receive written confirmation of this decision within 5 working days.
Just to say that we've spoken about the live music indoors and outdoors.
Sorry, did I miss something?
Yeah, okay. I can tell you that the live music and recorded music indoors to be granted as 800 hours to 30 hours, Monday to Sunday. Outdoor areas, 8 hours to 23 hours, Monday to Sunday. Plays as applied for. Late night refreshment as applied for. And opening hours as applied for. And that concludes the hearing and the decision. Thank you.
If I can clarify, you'll all receive a letter of your rights of appeal and the process as well following this committee today. And similarly, the applicant will also have that same letter. It's 21 days, but there'll be, you'll get your letter once you've been advised today of what the outcome is, and then you'll get 21 days to appeal to the magistrate. Okay?
We have taken a decision on it, and as has been announced, and that's where we are. So we can't get involved in any conversation or discussion on it now. Our decision is as outlined. Thank you. Yeah, okay, fine.
That's correct, I think. And obviously this, you've heard from the solicitor for the applicant. This is effectively a first hurdle, the licensing application, subject to appeal, but there is a planning application to be made separately, which is an entirely separate matter from the licensing application, and will be considered afresh. The planning committee won't be influenced in any way by the fact that the licensing application has been granted.
Right, thank you very much.